Hello everyone, welcome to this month's edition of North Central Outdoors. I'm your host Nathan Karch. We've got about 3 topics to cover today. Turkey season, number 1, fishing, and then boating. And I want to make this segment a little bit about what you would encounter if you were contacted by a Tennessee game warden, kind of what we look for when we do our field inspection. So I just want you to be aware of all these different criteria, and that way you've got it if you're ever contacted out in the field. So first and foremost, turkey season. It's been very, very productive despite us cutting back the season a couple weeks, and it's starting 2 weeks later than normal. The harvest numbers have been great so far, and you know, we are experiencing a decline. That's why we cut back the number of birds you can take per season from 3 to 2. But despite, you know, the 2-week late period, it's been really, really good. So we're happy to see those numbers. Now it's starting to dwindle down. You know, that's pretty normal. After the first couple weeks of season, it really starts to dwindle down, and the hunters aren't as active. They may have already, you know, got their bag limit of those 2 birds. So that's kind of why we see that. And with temperatures warming up, it also affects the number of harvests. But when you're contacted by us out in the field, when it's pertaining to turkey season, what we're kind of looking for is making sure, number 1, if you harvested and you were successful, that you tag that bird. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. The easiest way is if you download our app, TWRA on the go, and you check that bird in right there at your fingertips on the app. If you don't have cell phone service at the time, you can place a temporary tag on the bird, and that will come with your license. You can print it off online, and it will just be a little paper tag, and you'll fix that to the turkey, and then whenever you get to a place that does have service, you just check it in that way. Another thing is the type of ammunition that you're using. So you've got to have like 4, 5, and 6 shot for turkeys. You can't have anything above that. Also, you know, be aware if you are hunting public land, you've got to have the appropriate licenses to do that. So we'll cover the licenses just right fast. So it's a type 001 if you're building your license. That's your base license. And then if you are shotgun hunting, it's going to be a type 09. If you're archery hunting, that's going to be a type 10. So you're going to have that 001 first and foremost. And then regardless of what you're hunting, you got to have that. Then shotguns type 10, archery's type, shotgun is type 09, archery is type 10. I'm sorry, I mixed that up. Also, if you are a lifetime license holder, you're good to go. A sportsman's holder, you're good to go. That covers all the state supplemental licenses. If you're hunting public land, you're gonna need a type 94 permit, but just private land only, sportsman, or the 01 and 09 or 01 and type 10. That's all you're gonna need. Also, just be aware, if you are hunting public land, there are several hunters that are mimicking the vocalizations of turkeys. So therefore, what you might think is a turkey that you're in pursuit of actually might be another human, another hunter. So you can get jammed up pretty quick. So always be aware of your target and what's beyond it before you pull that trigger. Be able to properly identify that it is in fact a turkey and not another human being, because there have been many, many incidents over the past few years on public land. And you might also encounter that on private land as well if there's numerous hunters, if you're dealing with a hunting lease and stuff like that. So it's more dangerous during turkey season that way, just because of people calling and sounding exactly like turkeys, and people are usually running and gunning. They're not confined to a certain specific blind or a tree stand like you would deer hunting. People do hunt out of blinds, but not as much. It's more you locate a bird and you pursue it. So please be careful, but be safe. On to fishing. Spring fishing has been fantastic lately, just due to the water temperatures and the clarity and everything like that. Everybody is catching almost every species that we have to offer here in the state of Tennessee. It's been great. So I really encourage you to go wet a line if you have an opportunity, because it's been great. But what we would be looking for as Tennessee game wardens if we were to inspect you out in the field would be to make sure you have your appropriate licenses. So first and foremost, that type 001 that I mentioned for your base license for turkey, that's gonna be the exact same thing for fishing. It's your basic type 001 hunt fish combo. So that's gonna be your baseline for anything that you do in the state. That's about $35 and it's good for an entire year. So from the date of purchase, it's good for an entire year. So make sure you have that. There's also another option. It's your type 20, and that's your county of residence license. So that will allow you to do any type of fishing in your county of residence, but you have to use live bait only, so no artificial lures or anything like that. And that's way cheaper than the type 001. But again, if you plan to do any fishing outside of the county that you're a resident of, you have to get that type 001. Also, be aware that pretty much every species of fish has a certain creel limit, and that's basically just a bag limit, just like wild game, just saying how many you can keep of each fish. So it's very important that you're able to properly identify each species of fish, because each one has a different length and length and creel limit. So depending on where you're at in the state, it'll have different length limits, and then also you'll have different creel limits for each. So Old Hickory and Priest might be completely different, although they're in the exact same district and region. So make sure to look at a fishing guide and be able to look at those specific limits pertaining to that specific body of water that you plan to do any type of fishing on. One important thing to note, paddle fish season is in full swing. It started April 24th and it'll run all the way to the end of May. Be mindful that you can have 2 paddle fish per person per day. There's no culling, which means basically if you were to already have your 2 and catch something else, catch a bigger one, and you wanted to replace it, you couldn't do that. It's 2 and you're done. Most of this takes place below dams where they are generating. They kind of like the swift water because they're filter feeders. They feed on plankton and algae and stuff like that, kind of like whale sharks in the ocean. They have big, huge mouths, and you can't catch them by normal angling methods, so you have to snag them. So be mindful, the conservation area for them is within 100 yards of a dam. So you cannot snag within 100 yards of the dam. You've got to be outside of that 100 yards area, because that's that conservation area, and they're kind of stacked up in there feeding. So make sure that you're outside that 100 yards. That is it for fishing. On to boating. So the biggest thing that we see in boating, and the biggest thing that will get you pulled over quickly, is registration. That's the first thing we look at, other than, you know, people just being absolutely crazy and operating in a reckless manner. The registration. So first and foremost, it has to be 3-inch block letters. It has to be contrasting letters. If, say, your hull is red, it can't be a different shade of red, because they blend in very, very good. It needs to be either white or black. It's got to be contrasting, that way we can identify it. I know it looks good if you have something similar and color match it, but you can't do that. It's got to be bold, and it can't be these italic cursive letters. It's got to be that bold print. There's got to be proper spacing. So what you'll see is you'll have TN space 4 numbers, and then you'll have an additional space, and then there'll be 2 letters. So you make sure that you have that proper spacing. They cannot be running together. So if we see right off the bat, if we see cursive letters and numbers, or just letters and numbers running all together, then we usually stop it. And then also, you'll have to have that decal placed before that registration number. So every year is color coded, and we can look at that color code and see whether or not it's valid for that certain year. Now, those colors will run into years to come. You can purchase it all the way 3 years from now. So that's really cool. But if we see a certain color that might be going out of date that year or did the previous year, we'll probably look your registration number up through our dispatch system, or we can do it on our phones through our database. And if it's expired or something like that, we usually pull you over, and then we do a safety compliance check. So when we do a safety compliance check, and this is what you need on your boat at all times, is first and foremost life jackets for everyone on board. And to furthermore emphasize the life jackets, they need to be U.S. Coast Guard approved, and everyone needs to be able to fit in said life jacket. So a youth life jacket is not going to suffice for somebody who's 250 pounds. We see that all the time. So make sure that they're readily accessible, U.S. Coast Guard approved, and that they fit everyone on board. If you plan to pick up anyone at a boat ramp or anything, make sure that you got a few extra to accommodate those people. Next, if you're in a kayak or on a paddleboard, you must have a life jacket that's U.S. Coast Guard approved on board. You don't have to necessarily be wearing it, but it does have to be present and readily accessible. So we encounter that all the time. People on paddlecraft, they don't think they need it. They do. They don't have to be wearing it, but they definitely need it on board. For vessels that are 16 feet and longer, they need a Type 4 throwable device. So what that is, kind of that circular buoy, or it's going to be a square cushion with handles on each side. That's if you were to get yourself or somebody is in a emergency situation and they're struggling to stay afloat, you can throw that out to them, and it kind of aids in buoyancy. It's not a life jacket, but it's a throwable device that is some sort of flotation that they can, you know, finally rest and until you can get them a life jacket or get them to safety. Also, fire extinguishers. Any vessel that does not have a equipped halon system, or if they have an enclosed gas tank, must be equipped with a fire extinguisher. If you have just a portable gas tank or something like that, you don't have to have a fire extinguisher, but it's always good to have one just in case maybe your engine catches fire or, you know, something arises where you need it. Definitely encourage you to have that fire extinguisher. There's two main types that we see. One is a push tab and one has a gauge. So we'll be looking at that if we were to check you for a safety compliance. Make sure the gauge is in the green, not the red. That means it's good to go. And then how you check the push tab, it has to have it's usually a yellow safety insert. And if you push that tab down, it should pop right back up if it's valid. If you compress it and it stays compressed, then you know it's not good anymore and you need to throw it away and replace it. And I'd encourage you to may check up on that every 6 months or so to make sure those fire extinguishers are still good. And then finally, if you plan on operating after dark, make sure that you have working navigation lights. So that means your red, green, and all-around white light. That all-around white light is your most important light. That's going to be located on the stern, and that needs to be the highest point of your vessel. So there's a lot of manufacturers that, you know, come equipped with these wakeboard towers or on pontoons, the bimini tops and stuff like that. And there are obstructions to where at different angles you cannot see that white light. So make sure that if you fall into that category, if that is you, get some sort of extension to make sure that it is visible from 360 degrees. And also, if you're anchored or anything like that, that's the one light that has to be on from sunset to sunrise. You don't have to have your red and greens on. If you're anchored or moored, that means just tied off to something. But that, again, that white light has to be on all the time. That way you're visible from 360 degrees. That wraps up this month's edition of North Central Outdoors. I hope if you haven't had an opportunity to go out and turkey hunt, please do so. The woods are on fire. Go wet a line and you know, try to catch some of these fish out here, because it's also been fantastic. And then boating, go ahead and get that equipment ready for this summer. That way you're prepared if you are stopped by a Tennessee game warden and you're ready to go. I hope everybody has an enjoyable time until we meet again, and as always, be safe. We'll see you next time.